how can you tell a brand story? What are the sort of plots that you might use and the archetypal plots that you might use to tell that brand story? In this video, I'm going to be exploring Christopher Booker's 7 different plot points, and I'm going to be explaining how you can adapt these to your brand. Now, if you haven't heard of or read Christopher Booker's 7 basic plot points, I highly recommend you do so. But this video is going to talk about the 5 plot points, and I'm going to disregard 2 of them for the purpose of this video only, and sort of use them in a more branded way. So Christopher Booker talks about the plot points as being rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, overcoming the monster, rebirth, and comedy and tragedy. Now, I'm going to disregard comedy and tragedy, not because I don't think they're right, they are, but just because you don't tend to see many brands wanting to talk about tragedy apart from sort of, charities, and I'm not going to be focusing on that. And the comedy part, I think Christopher Booker's definition of comedy is different to what current brands would see as comedic. So I'm going to focus on those first 5. Number 1, rags to riches. Now, you typically see this story plot in films like Oliver Twist or Cinderella, where the protagonist rises up from almost nothing to their full potential. So typically at the start of this story, you see the homeostasis, the hero or the protagonist is, at a low point. This is their sort of dreary, oppressed life. They are not having fun. They are really feeling oppressed, either physically or mentally. For example, with Cinderella and the ugly stepsisters, or Oliver being held down by poverty. So they are stuck in this existing way of life that is not a fun place to be. And with the rags to riches story plot, you tend to see this arc of them suddenly sort of being introduced to this mentor. So coming across this mentor and who helps enable them to realize their inner potential and their inner power, and they start to suddenly see that life could actually be really different from them. So they're going on this journey of self-actualization, self-realization, and the story unfolds with them seeing this glimpse of life. Think of Aladdin in poverty, and he sees Jasmine and he sees the palace and what he could have, and then he goes on this journey where he almost impersonates a prince. So this is an example of a rags to riches story where they're rising up, they're seeing a glimpse of what could be possible, and then something happens to push them back down, and they're going right from here to there. They're falling back down into their pit of oppression. Then finally the resolution part comes through where they overcome this, and it might be that they become the person they were born to be. Aladdin becomes a prince, or Oliver becomes, this sort of leader, this powerful, rich man. So that's typically what you see in the rags to riches story. Number 2 is rebirth, and think of Batman as I walk through this example. So with rebirth, you typically see the character, the protagonist, starting to be faced by this internal battle, this dark force coming towards them and almost like engulfing them. So think of Batman and when he starts to sort of be overcome by this like dark mood, this dark sort of feeling of despair and depression right at the start, and he's lost someone that he loved back in the past, and he's just sort of really struggling to face himself. That is the example of the rebirth story, and he goes on this journey of becoming who he was, but instead of him overcoming this power that is physical, another enemy, for example, he's overcoming something in himself. And there's plenty more examples like that. So I talked before about Fight Club, where the protagonist is actually overcoming himself. This inner dark power is trying to overcome him, and he is battling this inner force within himself. So this is the rebirth, and you'll typically see the character overcoming this this problem, this power within themselves, and becoming healed and a better person for it. So that is the example of the rebirth story plot. Number 3, overcoming the monster. So we just heard about the rebirth, where this inner force, this inner destructive force was themselves. Overcoming the monster, you see that force turn into a physical, external force. So think of Jaws, for example, or any sort of film or story where they're overcoming a physical force that is real, and there's a real enemy. So in Lord of the Rings, they're overcoming the Sauron and his army, and Solomon, and there's a battle that has to happen, or Harry Potter overcoming Voldemort and the sort of the group. I forget their name now. What are they called? Anyway, Malfoy and all his mates, they're the sort of enemy, so overcoming the monster. So in these stories, they're sort of more like the traditional story that you might see, you know, like Planet of the Apes, where there's this big actual physical battle and the protagonist is overcoming this this sort of army against him. So these are your typical action films, your typical thriller slash action films where there's this big sort of scene, this big battle of conflict, and there's a real life monster. So like Stranger Things, they're battling this external force, and you typically see the characters grouping together and getting allies in all the right places so that they can overcome this big monster together. Number 4, the quest. This is one of my favorites actually, because I think it's quite relevant to brands, and you typically see a lot of startups using the quest story plot because it's just really relates to overcoming this challenge and this hurdle, but not in that you're sort of battling against enemies. There's this almost like mountain that you've got to climb, and these hurdles that you've got to cross over, this journey that you've got to go through to get from A to B. There's stories like Patagonia where they're talking about sustainability and climate awareness and climate change, and they know they're not there yet, so here is where they want to be. They're here, so their quest is to go from, you know, being the brand that everyone knows, who's battling against climate change, to sort of this big journey and overcoming all these sort of hurdles along the way, maybe being thrown on a curveball somewhere because they've come up against this pain point, but then finally their aim is to reach this vision and becoming the most sustainable brand there is. But also startups, you know, when they start a brand, they're coming in and they're going, we're shaking up the norm, we're taking these big brands and we're gonna, you know, try and knock them down and push through, and we know it's going to be a tough journey, but we're determined to do this together, and we can't do this alone, so we need to build a team of really capable, efficient and skilled team members to come and help us to build this product that's really gonna change the way people think about this. So startups love the quest story plot, and it almost like rallies people around you. So think of, you know, someone that's setting off on this adventure, they've been put on this mission on Earth, maybe they've met like a mentor that's sort of given them this perilous journey to obtain this thing that they need to set out and go and achieve this journey, and you're kind of going to rally around people that are cheering you on. So that's why I think startups and brands quite like this one, because it attracts a community of people clapping you on and sort of supporting you. And the 5th one is the voyage and return. And typically you see this with films like Avatar, or, you know, Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland, when you're introduced to this like incredible new world through the eyes of the protagonist. So usually it starts out with this hero, protagonist, whatever you want to call it, bored with their sort of mundane everyday life, and they're sort of daydreaming for this sense of adventure. And I've got tons of examples here in my head. So Avatar, you know, the man, and he's sort of stumbles on this new world that just is totally like mind-boggling to him. Or Harry Potter, very bored with his day-to-day life, stumbles on this whole new world that is totally foreign to him. You know, or the Wizard of Oz embarking on this journey, or Alice in Wonderland embarking on this journey and discovering this like new mental and really wacky world that she has never experienced before. So that's usually the start of the story, where they discover the discovery of a new world. And I know that I've mentioned Harry Potter and in different archetypes, and that's because you can have a mix of a couple. So usually you'll see the Voyage and Return mixed with overcoming the monster as well, because the climax and the sort of the conflict usually happens with overcoming the monster. But it's more about the world, and I love this one because it's all about world building, and if you think of Avatar, like, think of the world that you're introduced to. It's like nothing that the viewer has ever experienced before. It's like you're stepping into this portal and you're kind of like, what is this place? This is insane. Like, this is so beyond what I ever perceived or imagined to be possible. This is really key in the Voyage and Return, that the protagonist has to go out into this whole new world through this sort of some kind of portal open to him by his mentor or this sort of gatekeeper, and they're guided along the way. So there's usually a guide that's going to sort of show them around, you know, like, here's your new world, like, here's what to discover. So think of Ron Weasley for Harry, or I forget her name in Avatar, where she sort of guides him, and they're like flying around on the back of this like crazy animal, and discovering. So the discovery and exploration is a huge part of this plot. So usually in the Voyage and Return, the world turns on them a little bit and starts to become this sort of quite scary, dark place. But that's okay, because they've always got their guide to help get them out, and to show them the way, show them the path forwards. And so they're able to sort of learn new skills. And if you think of all the skills that your favourite protagonist learns, like in Avatar, he learns all these tricks, the fly, and Simba learns how to like hunt and how to be by himself and how to be independent. So they defeat something along the way, whether it's an enemy or, you know, maybe that goes into overcoming the monster, and they have to defeat this enemy and protect the integrity of the new world that they've discovered. So that is something that you see in Avatar and in Harry Potter, for example. So that brings me to the end, and I really hope this has been helpful in understanding the 7 different story plots. Bearing in mind I haven't gone into comedy or tragedy, but of Christopher Booker's the 7 basic story plots. And let me know in the comments if there's anything else that you want me to explore around this. I'm going to be continuing my storytelling theme and exploring this in context of brands. See you next week.